it here. Okay, got it. Thanks. Now we're recording. But just from a background standpoint, a little bit about me, and sorry for all the noise on the screen. I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm actually born and raised here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And on, my journey of getting into Scrum and Agile started with my husband, who's actually a commercial software developer, or was. And when we started dating 10 years ago, he started talking about these ways of working and extreme programming and collaboration and Scrum and all this stuff. And I stepped back and I was like, wait a minute, that's how I like to work, leading projects in HR, trying to get everyone together. And of course, at the time, and he hates when I say this, he was like, well, that's just for us, though. It's really only for product development and technology. And I thought that was just ridiculous. So I went on a journey over the last 10 years to really go deep into learning the frameworks. Spent time actually this past year with the folks at Scrum Inc. and Dr. Sutherland himself talking about not only scale, but how do we start to invite HR and the culture side deeper into this work so that the ways of working and the ways of being have a chance to thrive, which has been awesome from a journey standpoint. And on the left are a bunch of companies that I've either worked for or gotten to work with, not just in an Agile context, but also do a ton of work in servant leadership, coaching and transformation. So with Department of Veterans Affairs, Fresenius, and a few others, really helping with the leadership side, and then others on HR ops and whatnot. So it's a little bit about me, but this session is more about you all. So what I'd love to do is do a little impromptu networking, and here's how I want to do this. I'm essentially going to pair you up into a breakout room, and you're each going to answer a question and take 1.5 minutes each to answer the question. I'll call you back. And guess what? I'll send you out 2 more times, and it'll give you a chance to interact with each other and start to get our juices flowing a little bit. So with that, I'm going to post our first question, and then I'll send you to breakout rooms. So the first question I'd like you to talk about is, what is the funniest thing you've experienced or seen in a virtual meeting this year? So what's the funniest thing you've seen or experienced in a virtual meeting this year? I'm going to go ahead and put everyone.
And just remember that piece will not be recorded. So yeah, it's totally up to you.
Yeah, exactly. Say what you want. You might get into a room with 3 people just based on the numbers, but I'm going to send you out, give each person a minute to answer that question, and then I'll call you back for the second round. Here you go.
Going on about it, but they didn't know.
Right. So. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so round 1. Hopefully that was a little bit of fun. Here's our next question. What is one thing you actually love about your work? What is one thing you actually love about your work? I'm going to go ahead and recreate these rooms, send you back out, have that conversation, and then we'll do one more round.
All right.
All right, welcome back. Bruce, I'm slightly joking. I'm like doing all the facilitator stuff now, so hopefully I do it right for all of you. So yeah, just
I think you're good. I think you'll do a fabulous job. I think.
Yeah, I think So how was that? I was it good to kind of talk to people? Have you done anything like that before?
No,
not for our meetup. And so thank you for showing us up, Beth.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
No, what it is it's a gift. No, it's a gift. And here's why. Because I think, as we're facilitating meetings or interacting with people, again, it ties in. There's always a reason I do these things. And part of it is the cultural element of, you don't know me and some of you don't know each other. How do we create an environment where you start to make connections and able to interact with people potentially in a different way, especially in our virtual world? It's actually impromptu networking. If any of you follow the liberating structures models, it's just a chance to get some energy going, but also to get people to, connect at a different way. So that's already one, possible takeaway. If you think about.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm just going to jump in and keep going. So maybe in the chat, if you think about, I don't know what everyone does for their work, but what are some of the bigger challenges that you're experiencing in your work right now? Maybe let's do a kind of, if you're comfortable, throw things in the chat. What are some big challenges that you're dealing with in your workplaces or with your clients right now? No one's got any challenges. Yep. Thanks, Bruce. Breaking old behaviors. Great. What else? Second guessing of priorities. Yeah, big one. Thank you. Thank you. Time frames. Yep. Yep. Helping leaders. Thank you. Yep. Oh, business using waterfall, development using Scrum. Great one. We'll talk a lot about that. Moving from Scrum to scaled. I'll try to weave some of that in. Retrospective with limited tools. Yeah. How do we do that? Yeah. And it's, the interesting thing with all these challenges is it's not unique to any one company. I think if you start to look at the list, and please keep them coming in, lots of organizations have the same challenges. And part of the reason I started doing the work that I do, leaving corporate to get into to consulting and coaching, was that I became equally frustrated looking at organizations who are investing a lot of time and energy into frameworks. We're sure great. We're going to use Scrum. We're going to start to use Kanban. We're going to bring these different methodologies in. But often what happens time and again is I watch the organizational culture and also the HR practices bump up against this wonderful way of working and being together. And people become very frustrated by the, they'll blame the framework. Oh, it's Scrum's fault or it's Agile's fault. And in reality, it's not. It's amplifying, and Bruce and I've talked about this a lot, is amplifying sometimes some dysfunction, sometimes some differences of opinions and priorities. And what I hope to leave you with today is a different way of looking at the lens of change and the challenges that companies go through when trying to adopt any new methodology of how we work together, but also how you invest in the soft side of this, right? And then also leaving some time for, well, how do we actually change our people practices to allow different ways of working to thrive in our organizations? And I want to share a picture, and please don't laugh at me, that I drew to really amplify this point. So most of companies that I've ever worked with really spend a lot of time focused on what? Value, results, money, right? And I've worked lots of places where what's the goal? Our goal is to be 70 million next year. Okay, why? What's the purpose of that? And so I invite you to start to think about, instead of focusing first on the results and the value, let's focus on first engaging our people. And in an engagement, I don't mean, let's give people free beer on Fridays. That was my first company out of college, or give them pizza or different things. I'm talking about true engagement where people have that sense of mastery, autonomy, and purpose in their work. And if you invest more in that at all levels of your company, your customers are going to feel it, right? Those who are getting your services, getting your products, and they're going to hopefully more often than not continue to choose to spend their money with you, regardless of what industry you're in. And that allows you to kind of live out your dream, right? And what's the purpose of our company? And so if you can start to think about engaging people to create this attraction culture, not only an agile culture, but an attraction culture, one that attracts future people to want to be with you, attracts future customers. And for those in the services industry, there's lots of people who provide services. So why should they come to be with you? And I bring that up because if we've got all these challenges and we're investing in Agile and we don't have a reason for doing it, right? Because guess what? Your greater goal, I'm sorry to say, is not Agile. And it's interesting, a lot of companies will say their biggest goal is their Agile transformation, and it's not. And I do a lot of work with companies saying, what is your greater goal? And the idea of having a greater goal around, what are we trying to do to align people? Someone said about shifting priorities. That's kind of the first step to me as an Agile culture, is not about one that moves with speed and efficiency, but also moves that way towards a purpose. Okay, so I'm just laying a little bit of foundation and then we'll interact again. I like this quote. from the Agile Business Consortium about what is an Agile culture. And I'm here to tell you there's no recipe for it. That's the other thing. And everyone's always disappointed. I'm like, there's no one fix because every company's different. And this idea of a culture that is, really underpinned by values. And a lot of you, I'm going to make an assumption, work with Scrum. I love the values side of Scrum, and there is not a company that those values work against their company values. Right. So if you lay them against each other and say, well, we want to have more courage. That's what one of the Scrum values. Does that work against a company value of respect or diversity? Or no, it actually amplifies and strengthens it. And also in an Agile culture, this idea of having behaviors and practices that allow people to actually be more flexible and adaptive and resilient. Right. And so that all sounds good. But why don't we get that? And that's what we're going to play with here today. I like this visual. And you don't have to do show of hands, but is anybody currently working in an organization where you are using some of the methods, tools, processes, but it's in a command and control environment, right? Or a very top-down, heavy hierarchy environment. I see Becky nodding her head. You can do it. Right. And we all know that you can use methodologies in any environment to try to get work done. Right. It's another way to get work done. But if you really want that change in culture and engagement and delivery and really feeling a sense of ownership, that's where bringing the principles and values and mindsets forward, not only in verbalizing them, but also you got to start to look at things like your structure. There's a great chapter in the book J.J. Sutherland just put out, the Scrum Field Guide. I think it's chapter 9. It's your structure is your culture. And often the structure dictates things like communication styles and who you can speak to. And so I just want to, again, set some visualization for you to say, if you want this culture change, you got to move past the frameworks and methodologies. And what that requires is a few things. And I like this visual around a modern agility. So let's not talk about the frameworks, but this idea of, making people awesome, like inviting people to do their best with you and share their time and talents with you. Delivering value continuously. I mean, we know that's the purpose, right? We want to deliver value to people continuously as best we can, but also making safety and actual psychological safety, which we're going to play with that a little bit later, making it a prerequisite. Making it safe to be yourself, making it safe to screw up, making it safe to say the hard things. Again, otherwise you're only going to get so far with your Agile work, and learning to experiment rapidly. And I can remember bringing this into an HR team, and I have told the story in the podcast I did with Bruce about, let's run an experiment to see if we do benefits presentations, if anyone shows up. And they were like, what if no one shows up? I'm like, well, 1, it's an experiment. And 2, we're totally going to learn something if nobody shows up. That had to be brought into the culture. But let's talk about change, right? So Peter Senge did work back in the 90s about building a learning organization. And I know lots of people follow his work. If you think about it, every company, every organization lives to provide what? A product or a service. Any company. Any organization, whether it's nonprofit, community-driven, government, everyone's providing some product or service. So that's dimension A of work. And dimension B of work is really about designing and implementing structures and systems and processes, right? This is where Scrum and Kanban, Lean, DevOps, all these different frameworks for delivery sit very nicely in the dimension B. It's a way of organizing people to get work done. But why do you think 80% of change efforts fail to produce their intended results? It's because we don't give any attention or limited attention to dimension C. And this is where culture comes in. If we think that we told everybody about the change, right? We communicated the change, but we didn't ask anybody how they actually felt about it, or their attitude was about it, or how they think about it. That's usually where change efforts fail. And I see this often, and I'm going to kind of pause here for a little interaction. When you start on this journey to being more agile or doing agile as a delivery method, and you start to bump up into bad attitudes, friction, conflict, can you see how possibly the change leadership that's required for these things to work could come into play? So I don't know. I mean, Bruce, I know you by name, but is there anyone maybe in the group, you've had an experience where you can see that, yeah, we started down this path, but we didn't really kind of give any time for people to actually feel anything about the change?
This is not
This
a
is
quiet
Joe.
group. Yeah, there we go.
I can
Joe.
I can weigh in. It's interesting because our agile transformation, like a lot of them, kind of started grassroots up, and so the change on the IT side kind of was slow and not necessarily planned, right? And then all of a sudden, there was enough mass around the change that the business had to change too, and they didn't see it coming. And they didn't really understand, that they had a role in business agility. It was, well, that's an IT thing, right? And now they're trying to catch up, and it's quite a change management exercise.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, and it happens often. And later I have a question for the group specific about HR, but I always wonder, I love the grassroots nature, right? I love when things, are organic. I think that beautiful things happen there, but also when it gets to that certain point, you start bumping up against the organization, that's where you either get a breakthrough or a breakdown, right? Or people become frustrated and say, well, at least we have it in our little pocket and that feels good. And I love that. But I think on a culture side, there's this element of, do we want more transparency in our company? Do we want more self-leadership? Do we want more trust? These ways of working can actually, when done well, amplify those things. And Greg, I see your comment about organizations at the top in middle kind of saying, they want this, but then the measures stay the same. And I completely agree with you. Again, we say we want the behavioral change or we want these results, but we haven't done the work to deal with not only our structure and our processes, but we also haven't dealt with, I'm paid and rewarded for hitting certain productivity measures or P&L management, and that's my bonus. So all of a sudden, right, someone asked about scaling, it takes a lot of strength and shared leadership, as I mentioned before, to make this happen. So again, we're not going to solve how to create the culture. It's more, what are the elements needed to create a culture where these things can actually thrive and grow? And I think a lot of times when companies start to scale, Jeff said this to me in class, he's like, scale good Scrum, right? Don't just scale to scale, because if you're not sure what your focus and priorities are, you're just going to start to spin up a bunch of change and people will kind of wait for it to go away. Let's go back to the way we used to do it. So thanks for that. Let me keep us moving because I want to respect time. I said this in the thing, this is my favorite comment about why Agile quote unquote transformations fail. And I think that word transformation is probably going to start to go away, because it's really not about transformation. To me means something was terribly wrong before, you have to transform it. I think it's more about a constant, growing and learning organization. Otherwise, if you're just doing the methods and not dealing with all the other stuff around your culture, you get better sameness, maybe just a little bit faster, right? And I don't mean to say that in a judgmental way, but I've seen enough teams that just, they can't get traction because there's so many things in their way, but the top down and others are saying, no, we want to go agile. And you're like, yeah, but you got to be willing to do the work as leaders. And they think, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, they think once you adopt Scrum, you're actually agile and you're transforming. And I think that's really powerful. So Bruce and I met through Agile People. I was one of the first certified facilitators of the Agility in HR class here in the United States. And we're going to spend the rest of our session today on 3 principles that I think personally are core towards setting an Agile culture. One of which is purpose and meaning, which we touched on a little bit earlier. Like, your purpose and meaning isn't Agile. I'm going to spend more time on psychological safety and self-leadership. I think personally, these principles are two that if you can pay attention to these concepts and also actions, you have a greater chance of creating some very ripe soil to plant new ways of working in your organization. So I'm going to put something up on the screen and then I'm going to make some breakout rooms. Some of you may be familiar with McGregor's work, Theory X, Theory Y, maybe not. So Theory X, on the left-hand side, a lot of people will say that they are personally a Theory Y person on the right, meaning I personally, like to work. I am pretty self-directed. I want to get responsibility, right conditions. I'm going to be very motivated and be very much ready to work. But a lot of people also see other people as Y, that most people are unmotivated. People would rather be told what to do. People are mainly focused on job security and fear of losing something, and that most people really have little creativity. And what's really kind of funny about this, and I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, have a conversation, an honest conversation if you can, about how you see things, both from your own lens, but also how you see your organizations. And I ask this because a lot of times when companies are trying to adopt new frameworks and change the culture, if you're a Theory X organization, or if your structure is about carrots and sticks and telling people what to do, it's really hard to say, let's have self-organizing teams that figure out how to do the work themselves, or let's not have managers and let's have everyone be peers on a team. That could freak a lot of people out because it's how you choose to see and think. Remember that dimension C. How do you choose to see and think about people? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. Take maybe 5-8 minutes in your breakout rooms and have a little bit of a conversation about this concept. How do you see people, but how do you really see it going in your organizations? And how does it affect your current work, whether you're using the frameworks or really trying to make an organizational shift? So let me just skinny us back to, let's do 3 rooms. And like I said, 5-8 minutes, just have a chat about this and we'll call back and see what you had to say. Really?
That's right.
Awesome.
Truth.
That's awesome. So yeah, so
Yeah.
what did you talk about in the groups? Do you see the X in your organizations? Do you see it as a challenge to what you're doing? Anyone brave enough to share?
From our group, it actually, it brought up a good point, because Danny was saying he joined a company, but he's from Indonesia, so and he feels they're definitely more over on the X side. So having the challenges come through, from their transformation, but it does bring up the culture aspect, based on even the culture, not just the company. Can play a huge factor into how you even manage the change. And I'm sure, and I'm sure Joe probably even has some stories with how large FedEx is and all over the globe, and how things are just different in each culture. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point too. So, there's personal belief systems, right? Our own personal values, how we see and think about things, how we relate to people, how we lead our lives. Then there's the organizational culture. And then to your point, Bruce, in the group, what you talked about, then there's the local culture of even in the United States, each state has a different culture. I worked for a company in Baton Rouge, and there was just certain things, Louisiana culture was different than Pennsylvania culture. And so I think the bigger your company, or you have people from diverse backgrounds, with different belief systems, and all of a sudden the complexity of, we're just going to start using this new framework. You start to see that stuff bump up against, like, why are we getting on each other's nerves? And it could be because we don't really know each other or care to know. We're just doing our jobs, right? There's not a deep knowledge of each other, but also, specifically if a culture has a belief system about people and they want to shift and say, well, we want to empower people now. Remember that picture, but our old way of doing things, we didn't do that. There's a trust factor there. Right. And I went through my own transformation as a leader. I was a little top down, I will admit, back in the day at UPMC, but it was because that was what I was rewarded for, was driving results and getting results through other people. cringing at that. And when I started to make the shift to servant leadership and shared leadership, this idea of how do I build up other people to be successful so that I can be more successful. But that took a lot of personal work. And I think when I go into organizations to help them shift their behavioral culture to allow agile ways of working and delivery to thrive, that's the hardest part. That's the hardest part, because I'm not there to tell you you were bad or wrong. It's that you got this other choice, and do you want to make it or not? So other thoughts about X and Y and how it affects the culture and the change?
I'm going to toss Daniel from our group under the bus. Daniel, you had a really good insight that I think caused a little bit of conversation for us, and I liked it.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. I do have those statements. I was just saying, I think, they've done a lot of research on psychological safety and just how humans react to different things. And I was just saying that I think having a foundation of X to a specific degree actually allows people to become Y people. So if you go through kind of each of the different parts of the slide, jumping in on, are they motivated mainly by money and fear about job security? Well, no, but if they're getting underpaid and there's constant FUD and turmoil, then they're not going to really be motivated by a desire to realize their own potential when they're worried about money in their job.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like, in my mind, it just seems to be more nuanced, where as long as you sort of just at least check the box on the X to provide a foundation for each one, then it allows Y to sort of build upon that, just like, like the hierarchy of needs sort of thing,
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to come back to that in a bit when we start talking about why wouldn't you invite the HR folks in to help you with your transformation? Because, in my work as a business partner, what you just said is we've got to make it, the compensation fair. We've got to make it easy for people to choose to be with us initially. And then how do we make it easy for people to choose to stay? And I think to your point, that's where when we're siloed up, or as Joe said, things start bumping up against organizational processes like the budget cycle or supply chain process, not to talk about all of my colleagues in business, but it's, we can't blame shift, right? So that actually leads to the next kind of concept around self-leadership. So I teach a program called 3 Vital Questions. And 3 Vital Questions is born out of work called From the Power of TED, the Empowerment Dynamic. And to Daniel's comment, it's born out of Dr. Cartman's work on the drama triangle. And that as human beings, like not just human doings, but human beings, we can all default into these very archetypal roles in drama. We can persecute, we can rescue, we can feel a bit powerless, a little bit of victimhood. And as humans, it's a natural default to kind of look at what's wrong, what's broken, who's against me, why things won't work, because we've got this wonderful brain that has survival instincts in it, right? So in the context of change, how we show up in organizations, this program to me helps with self-leadership. Because if you think about it, theory X, even if you truly believe in X and you almost infantilize your workforce, meaning you're going to tell them what to do, tell them, exactly the rules, the policies, even though you're paid maybe $150,000 a year, we're still going to have you not have the ability to spend like $1,000 on a training without multiple sign-offs, that kind of stuff. But think about it. You're hiring, I'm going to guess, most of you are hiring adults, right, who are responsible, right, pay their bills, pay their taxes, choose to get married or have partnerships, produce children or not, right? You do all these very responsible things, but yet you come into the workplace and we're going to assume you're about 12, in a lot of cases. And that's where we get into, again, the organizational structure. When you want to start being more agile, we want to empower people and we want to delegate authority. It's how we choose to see about people. So I'll offer you these 3 vital questions as a takeaway. So the first one is just as a leading yourself, right? Don't worry about everybody else, but you're leading yourself in a company. Where are you putting your focus? Is your focus on problems to react to, right? Because we love good problem solving, right? And I think Scrum is beautiful for problem solving. But if we're reacting to problems and that everything is a problem to react to, right? Or are we focused on outcomes? Right? Think about in terms of creating value in that delivery stream. So where's your focus? And if your focus is always on that reacting to the problem of the day, you're going to lead to what? How you relate to people is going to be very much rooted in drama. And you yourself may perpetuate it. The change you're trying to lead may perpetuate that drama. And this idea of your choice, right? That you're at choice on how you want to relate to others, your experience, and yourself. All right. So again, reminding ourselves as we lead ourselves first before we look at others, how are we showing up? Are we showing up in a way that empowers others to be more resourceful, resilient, and innovative, or not? So in our culture, if we're in a toxic workplace culture, maybe not because somebody tried to make it toxic, but like, how do we start to become more agile if we're relating to each other as problems? Or as leaders, we see people as resources, right? I get really fired up when I hear people say, well, I don't have the resources for that. And I might say, well, Greg, you're in the middle of my screen, so I'll just pick on you. You know, Greg, are you a resource, right? No, you're a person with real thoughts, real feelings, real ideas. But if we treat people as resources and we start to allocate people to teams, you can see where this idea of agile goes out the window, right? And then the last vital question that I'm going to leave you with on just self-leadership as a part of your agile culture is helping people take generative action, right? We all know that the idea of agile is incremental and it's in the small, right? And it's in this small experimentation, delivering something of value frequently, right? And if we're reacting to problems all the time, right? We set a sprint goal, but you know, all this other stuff spun up and threw our sprint off. Or hey, you know, I'm looking at Thomas now. Thomas, just do this. I'm your boss. You know, I know you're in that Scrum team, but you know, I need you to go do this other thing on the side. Again, it creates this culture where we're not really agile. We're not being transparent. We're not being open. We're just reactive to the problems, right? So self-leadership is a really important piece of that culture. If you don't have the ability to see people as able to lead themselves, it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be hard. So any questions about that before I shift topics into psychological safety? Any comments?
That last one you said about actions, I was talking the other day about, do you feel like you have to give an answer right away when there's an issue? Or do you say, let me think about it and let's work together on solving the problem? And if you're in that, let me give you an answer right away so I can get you out of my office, or just give me an answer so I can get my job done, you know?
Yeah.
That's the difference between that and like,
Yeah,
I'll give
and
you an
it's
answer in 15 minutes and then we'll talk about it.
right. And then the thing is, right, they keep coming back for the answers. So as leaders, right, if one of our things we want to do is develop people, sometimes it is easier because we're all so busy, right? But we're not focused, we're just busy. And then, yep, just go, I'm going to give you the answers. You're almost like a Pez dispenser, right? You're pezzing out the answers all day. And here's an analogy for you. I wish I had my Pez. A Pez dispenser is full of what? Candy and sugar. You give a small child, candy and sugar, right? You give them the candy and sugar, kids get addicted. Well, if you're pezzing out the answers all the time, right? Think about this. People get addicted. And then all of a sudden at the end of the day, they're addicted. Your Pez dispenser is empty and you're still not moving forward towards outcomes. So like, think about this on a Scrum team, right? You know, if we're constantly pezzing out, telling people what to do this, do that, and not empowering people to think and collaborate, again, you'll wonder why you're not getting maybe the hoped for results in these ways of working, right? So again, there's work to do on the being agile, right? The heart and the head side as much as the doing, right? So something to think about there. Other thoughts, comments? Okay, let's talk about psychological safety. Daniel, you led us there perfectly. Again, one of my very pathetic drawings. There's a reason I'm not an artist for a living. But if you think about psychological safety, the concept is really, you know, rooted in this idea of, can I be myself? Is it safe to say things? Is it safe to potentially take risks? But if we create environments, when I talk about engagement, people start to think of, you know, oh, make it cushy and nice and everyone's happy. But in our workplaces, if we only make people happy and they're not really motivated or accountable to any results, we get that I'm in a comfort zone, and you get people who are vacationing, kind of the country club, or retired in place, kind of chilling out, and boy, they're happy, but what are we getting done? And on the same vein, if our organizations are super motivated and accountable and we're driving forward and Agile's making us go faster, but we aren't safe to say the hard things like, hey, that policy's in our way, or hey, product owner, you're not really available and it's causing problems for us, we get high anxiety, high stress workplaces, right? So the culture becomes unhealthy and toxic, which leads to what? The drama we just talked about. And all of a sudden, everyone's pointing at what? Yeah, it's Scrum's fault, right? It's that Scrum thing's fault. That's why we're such a mess. And so what we're really looking for with psychological safety is to get people to feel that they are both safe and motivated and accountable and feeling part of something. And that's where you get learning organizations that we talked about. And that's where real generative value delivery can start to thrive. But if you don't invest in all that, you end up at best with a high anxiety workplace, or a really happy one that's not productive, or worse, you get an apathetic workplace. And apathy is nothing. Like, I literally feel nothing. I'm just hanging out waiting for my next job. And so I tie that all together because if you're only doing frameworks, or you're only trying to make people feel engaged, or you're only focused in one area, it's the loop. That's why my company's called Loop. Like, you got to kind of loop it all together, because you need all three pieces in order to really move your organization forward. So again, looking at your culture through those lenses. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to put in the chat. We have, I hate to call it a game, but in our Agile people world, they created the psychological safety game. I'm giving it to you in the chat because this is actually free and something that you can use with your teams whenever you want. But I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. And as a group, since we're we've been in some breakout rooms, let me share my screen again. I'm going to just hover over a couple concepts and ask you, do you think this, what's on the screen, either increases or decreases psychological safety? Okay. So let's talk about micromanaging the how instead of letting the team decide. How would this have an effect on decreasing people's psychological safety?
Makes them feel like they don't have any control.
Yeah, no control. What else?
Stifles their creativity.
Yeah, I think it creates that anxiety, because it's, to me, it's sort of like the difference between, if I ask you, Beth, like, what's 5 + 5, right? There's only one answer, 10, right? And that's what I think micromanaging is. Instead of me coming to the team, kind of what Charles was saying, it's going, what 2 numbers might make up 10? Now
Yes.
it opens up a lot of more options, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the managers are playing this guessing game with the teams. It's like, I've got an answer in my head. I'm going to see if you get it right. You know, that's when they're trying to kind of manage that how.
Yeah. And Bruce, to that point, you know, so again, about culture, right? You're changing. All of a sudden, we say we want more empowered teams, empowered teaming. We want self-organization, which is, you know, letting people decide the how. Sometimes people hear self-organization and they think, oh my gosh, everyone's going to unionize and all that stuff. But it's like, no, but the managers are going through a change themselves, right? If I used to be held accountable for productivity and my measurements, right, start to connect these dots. Now you're asking me to ask people questions and coach people. I'm used to telling people what to do because that's what I'm good at and that's what I got paid for. So again, the dimensions of change get really thick in your culture, because you like, we really want to be agile and we really want to do these new things, but we're still going to micromanage people. And so as leaders leading this change, there is this element of how do you invite these managers in to help them not feel threatened by this? Because sometimes it feels like this agile change is about taking away my job and my status and my identity. And now I don't feel psychologically safe to challenge this because, you know, I report to Nikhil, and Nikhil's the CEO and he wants this agile thing. So I'm not going to go against him, but I feel really anxious about it. Right. So you can see how funky this gets quickly. Let's see one that could increase your psychological safety. If you worked somewhere that you had freedom to not be perfect, what does that do for you in terms of feeling I can be myself, I can say good things, I can not be perfect? What does that do to increase psychological safety?
Reduces fear of
Okay.
failure.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, reduces fear of failure. I'm not perfect. And as leaders, if we show people that we're not perfect and we can admit mistakes, doesn't that make it safer for people? Doesn't that feel safer for people? Let's try one more. I want to stay positive. So kind of that point, freedom to try again. Who's had a sprint that just has epically failed? Did you get a second chance? We thought it was going to go like this. Yeah, thanks, right? Of course, right? That's the whole point. Failing, it didn't go the way we thought. We're going to try again, right? And you can learn something from it, right? It's not, yep, you failed, you're not perfect, no more Scrum, right? That's not a safe environment. So I bring this forward just, again, this is something you can take back to your teams. I think it's really fun to have a conversation with people, not only about why these things increase our safety, but also if you've got stuff going on in your team or your organization, it kind of creates a little bit of an open dialogue to name things. Because then if you're like, well, wait, if we're doing that, what can we do to change it? And is there anything in our control? You know, and somebody asked about scaling. You know, one of the things I love about the Scrum at Scale framework is the executive action team. Let's constantly bubble stuff up to say, this is, thanks, Greg, this is in the team's way. Y'all got to deal with it. And that's where shared leadership comes into this as another element, right? So I don't mean to say this is a lot of work, but if you really want the Agile way of being and working to thrive, there's an investment in all of it that really needs to take place. Let me take us forward just on a couple more concepts, and then I want to leave time just for chat and conversation. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but there's a reason, because I think there's a lot to our cultures. And again, I'm not giving you how to do it. It's more things to think about. And Bruce, I will share these slides with you. Kind of the biggest thing about growing culture, especially an Agile one, is about removing those limiting structures. Mostly from finance and HR, right? And I've been in HR and I worked with lots of finance folks, and we don't do it always on purpose, but it's also about creating supporting structures that make it easy for people to behave differently, and modeling new behaviors, and then showing them and learning new ways of acting and working, and amplifying those things that are going well. So to Joe's point, you know, let's say this is helping us, we want more of this. But then, you know, if there's behaviors that are unhelpful, let's not do that anymore. And then just keep repeating and repeating. So I'd ask the group, because I come from HR background and it drives me crazy when this doesn't happen, what's prevented you from involving HR more in your Agile journey? Maybe throw it in the chat or throw out a comment. If you haven't involved them in your journey just yet, why not? Can't wait to see what people say. Well, you're a contractor. Okay, Chris. That's funny. Why not? If you haven't involved them yet, why not? Why not? Waiting for someone to say, because my HR people aren't very nice, which I have actually had someone say that before. Some of us did get into the profession because we actually do like people. So again, it's something to think about. Doesn't want to restructure and reorg and write job descriptions. Geez, that's nice. Thank you. They document stuff in secret personnel files, right? You come tell them about something and they're gonna write you up. What is this Agile thing? How's it changing my life? And it's a bit of a rhetorical question. You know, there was this article, I started working in 1999, so I'm 43 years old. I worked for a company called Free Markets, which is now SAP Ariba. And we were called People Development back then in 1999. That's maybe where I caught this bug. And we were very focused on not being very HRE. You know, of course, we respected the laws and we worked globally, but we were very much about collaboration and people. In 2005, Fast Company wrote this article called Why We Hate HR. And at first I was like, oh God, this is terrible. But I read it and I'm like, geez, I hate HR too, if this is what it's about. Because I, at the time, did not work in a traditional HR organization. And I challenged this of like, how much has really changed since 2005? And trust me, I love the profession. I think we can do so much good with and for others. But a lot of companies do see it as necessary evil. They don't really have business acumen. There's really a focus on efficiency over value and a lot of administrivia. And there's a lot of talk about, we need to be more strategic in HR. my mindset is being able to hook into the agile ways of being and working is being strategic. But in your company, if you're starting to bump up against things like, we're going to start hiring Scrum Masters, and the recruiter doesn't know to challenge you to say, why are we hiring an external Scrum Master? Why isn't someone on the team wearing the hat? Possibly, or they write a job description for a product owner, but it really sounds like a project manager or a business analyst, and it really doesn't seem like it's in line with the framework. How can they help you with that and get you the right people if they don't know what the heck Scrum is, right? Or they don't understand why you're doing this IT. And then similarly, if you start to say, we want all these culture changes, and the HR team, and I've been in big organizations, small ones, where you've got silos within HR, why wouldn't we get them involved? So I want to talk just for a minute about HR being agile. And it's not to be buzzy about it. It's really about thinking about how HR can both use the frameworks for delivery, but also the deliverables themselves. And this idea that, if we want to change our culture and we want to create an environment that's more agile, why from HR would we not involve our customers, who are who? You all, right? The people who are working with us, in creating the solution. Yeah, there's legal stuff that we can't change, right? It's the law, but let's create a new performance system together. And maybe the one we use for the folks in Tennessee is a little bit different than the folks in Pittsburgh, because your line of business is this and ours is that. Partnering with the business, but also using the methods to deliver. So I just tell you 2 quick stories, and then I'm done talking and we'll have questions, because I respect your time. I did this for a company that I joined as the head of HR that never had HR. And about 1,000 people, 500 in Chennai, the rest scattered about the US. We were in health analytics, CO health analytics. And so I used this visual for them initially to say, this is complicated, right? We've got business strategy, we've got all these internal partner groups, we're trying to drive results, but then here's all the stuff that a traditional HR organization is responsible for. I had no people, they had no idea what this stuff was, and I said, this is complexity in action. What works good in complexity? Scrum, Kanban, visualizing our work, let's be agile. And so we went on this journey to do a couple of things. We started using Kanban for HR. It's crazy, the stuff that comes in, right? And in any team, supply chain, finance, IT, we had compliance stuff going on, training stuff, benefits stuff, recruiting stuff, and the wall of crazy. This is the organized wall of crazy. But we first started to establish flow, to say we can only do so much as a small team. How do we visualize our work? But then how do we make it visible to the company where we're spending our time? So it was a great way to start to empower a team, but also use the methods. And then I went a step further and said, we've got to re-implement our HRIS system. Guess what? This was our Scrum board. And we recruited volunteers from the business. We only had 1 person from my team on the team. We were implementing time and attendance, rewriting job descriptions, and everyone was a part of the team. And guess what that helped with? Change adoption. Because it wasn't Beth coming to them saying, you have to punch in and out. It was their colleagues saying, hey, you've got to punch in and out, right? And it felt like shared ownership. This is a whole other topic, but I think if you can increase HR's awareness, but then also using it to actually deliver services, it's really powerful. So in closing, I know I covered a lot of all over the place ground, and I didn't tell you how to create an agile culture. But what I hoped I did was plant enough seeds for you to say, gosh, there's a lot of dimensions that we have to think about to really start to evolve and move forward. And if you take nothing else away, it's about giving the right conditions for this to be successful. And I'd like to leave you with a thought, and maybe take this for yourselves. What is your 15%? Meaning, from today's conversation, is there one thing that you could do right away from today's session, whether it's doing some impromptu networking, psychological safety game, just chatting with someone in HR, that you can do without needing any more freedom, permission, control? You could just go do it. What do you want to start to experiment with in service to creating a more agile culture? And maybe you don't think you have the power to do that, but I'd ask you to just take a minute to reflect about that. And then I'm happy to just kind of close off, stop talking at you, and answer any questions, or just have a dialogue about the concept. What's your 15%? And that's it. That's all I had. I hope it was helpful. There's lots we could talk about for days. Bruce, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to hang out and chat, answer questions, whatever's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I greatly appreciate it. And, we do, I don't know, I know most of the faces, but I know Becky specifically works in HR. So,
Hopefully I didn't offend you, Becky, with the HR talk.
No, yeah, I feel, you're singing to the choir.
Yay.
It resonated so much. And to me, we were on a journey of an agile transformation, and we knew it would be something that would take time. But what stuck out to me is it's the culture. It's almost like you need to start with that in order for the rest of it to be successful. And so, yeah, this totally resonated. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. And if you don't start there, it'll eventually show up, as kind of Joe mentioned. And that's where, it's fine. I'm with a client right now that I've talked to them about, this is all going to show up. And they're like, we're not ready. We're not ready. Just help us get teams going. And I'm like, okay. But we try to pepper it in, to kind of help them see it. And their HR leader is interested, but kind of scared of it a little bit. Yeah. So I just hate to watch people get excited about something new and then it gets taken away from them, because that to me is disheartening.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Questions.
Yeah.
Can, because you started getting into it, and I actually wrote a question that I had for myself was, I'm gonna email you later, ask about it. But can an HR group, you're talking about culture and transforming the culture of organization with HR supporting that, but if the HR department doesn't act in an agile way or manage themselves in an agile way, can they truly really be successful? Because do they really understand the benefits of doing it, and therefore become passionate about hiring the right people to make it all successful, because they have seen how it can be more successful in the way it is?
Yeah, you're hitting on my passion point there, Greg. I think it needs attention. And so that's part of the reason the work I do is what I do. So if you have that HR team, I want to meet them, because exposing them to, I run a class that's Scrum for HR. It's enough to understand what's going on. Bruce and I have our Agile class for Agile people in HR. But also I think if you're running a team, if you have one person to say, hey, why don't you come to our daily Scrum just to see it, or come to a sprint review and see what it's all about. Some people will be very interested in it and they may go back. But I think also if it matters to the company, inviting them in, giving them some, not just training, right? I mean, I saw this, the FedEx folks, Joe, FedEx Ground here in Pittsburgh, a friend of mine is part of the learning and development. And she said, we got a little training, but we really didn't think it applied to us. And then I start going off on my tangent saying, oh my gosh, you can use Scrum for this and you can do that, and service delivery for HR. And she's like, okay, I had no idea. And so, you gotta, I think, Greg, there's no one answer, but it's the invitation to why this matters. And if you want someone passionate to talk to HR people about this, I mean, you got Becky here. It sounds like she's really into it, but also for me, I want people to see the value of these ways of working, because you can actually increase service delivery and create policies and products that people actually want from HR, instead of just saying, here's this thing you have to do. I don't know. Sorry, maybe a little too much passion.
No, I have the same debate with the people trying to implement Agile in a marketing department.
Yeah. If you don't understand why the value and the deeper values of it and how it's not just a way of working, it's a way of being together. I think that it changes a lot, and we want more collaboration, more people, why wouldn't you invite marketing into the HR team to talk about employment branding? Why not? And why wouldn't you invite IT in to kind of have a conversation about what people have more skills in their job titles, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
They're afraid to be wrong.
True. And that gets back to psychological safety and culture and what we reward and incentivize, right? Bruce, we could talk about this for a year.
Yeah.
And
I think too.
Oh, sorry, Bruce. I was just going to say the what kinds of skills we value and understanding the underlying principles of Agile, I think, is something that is really important in the HR space, because we have years and years of creating very structured approaches to hiring, which require, X number of years with these certifications and, all these boxes with very rigid guidelines to them, which, okay, some of those things are valuable in the Agile environment, but aptitude and attitude are often just as valuable. And changing that mindset to, sometimes somebody with 2-3 years of experience who can dig in and flex and think differently about how to solve problems and wants to build a coalition to address things might be more successful than someone with 10-15 years of experience, but they only know 2-3 ways to address it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I might add, I'm going to add something to that too. And then the other side is, somebody's been with the company for 10 or 15 years and you want to start working in a Scrum context. And let's say you want to recruit people or seek volunteers. And you're like, well, but we can't have Bruce on that team because Bruce ... Well, what if you put Bruce in this new context, a different way of working with different focus and things like that? And what if Bruce thrives? And what if everything comes forward in a way that wouldn't in the current structure or role? And I think that's where, that's funny. No comment, Daniel. Just this idea of the assumptions we carry about people. It's not saying that traditional ways of working were wrong or that Agile is right. It's just kind of on the continuum. What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want more engagement? Do you want more productivity? Do you want higher innovation? Do you want to have retention and, internal turnover and not wars for talent and all this happy stuff that we talk about in HR? This is where bringing all these things together, right? So I think it's the thing I hope you take away from today is if you're bumping up against stuff, not to point at it as the blaming, right? Oh, that's the HR thing is in our way, or that's a thing that's in our way. It's more, there's something in our way. Who are the right people to invite in to say, this is kind of causing us trouble in delivery? Like, could we change it? Is that okay? I don't know. I'm probably too optimistic, but I just think if you don't ask, you'll never know.
And that's a good comment too, Joe, because I actually have a client now where they're taking an invitation-based approach to their Agile adoption. And so we're actually interviewing people more on mindset, so the attitude and the aptitude, because you can teach someone Java, they can learn Scrum, but you can't really teach so much that kind of growth mindset, right? And again, I think growth fix gets overused quite a bit, but having people that are more open to adaptability, creativity, they're going to be taking an invitation-based approach. The adoption and ownership is going to be longer lasting than if it was dictated from the top down. It'll be slower, absolutely.
Bruce, you made a comment about the culture before too, and how, sorry to jump in on you, but this, in my podcast, there's an episode on In the Loop. The guy's name is Waleed Riaz, and I met Waleed at my Scrum at Scale training, and Waleed's from Pakistan, and he leads a fairly large software development shop in Pakistan. And we got to talking about just this, the culture stuff, when we met in Boston. And he said, Beth, we had to restart our entire Scrum journey because we were so focused in our own personal culture. And they had what he said was a yes, sir culture, meaning no one would challenge the leaders. They were pushing for ideas. And it came down to, this is his words, not mine. He said, we were so damn Pakistani. And he's like, so he and his co-founder had to step back and say, we really need to work on our culture before we try to keep scaling Scrum for our product delivery, because we need to do work to make it safe for everyone to be themselves. We have a very diverse workforce from different parts of the country as well as other countries, and we're not getting the results that we could. And so they went on this long journey to really break down and shed assumptions and beliefs. They did lose some people that really wanted, as Joe said, they wanted the clear career path and they wanted the status and check the box, but they made a conscious choice to change their workplace culture And it's a fun listen if you go out and listen to it. And he's very proud of it. But it was a recognition by leaders to say, we've got to make it okay to allow these behaviors to happen. Otherwise, we're never going to get the results that we need to keep our business running to serve our customers who are hiring us to do product development for them. So I think, when you start to sniff these things out, and you might say, well, I'm not in a place of power to do anything. Maybe bring it to someone else who could be helpful to you, and I think it's never going to be easy. But maybe listen to that. I think it's really inspirational, and it's worth it. If you can check your ego and say, why are we really wanting something better? It's because we want to keep having a business, and get to do this work together. So.
I'm going to go ahead just so we can close on time and then be respectful of everybody's time. But for anyone that will want to drop off, you're welcome to, or you can hang around if Beth has a few minutes to kind of chat. And of course, please go out, connect with her on LinkedIn. You'll get some wonderful content. Just a quick reminder. So next month, August 27th, it's actually going to be a lunch meetup because our guest is going to be from the UK, Craig Coburn, a distant relative to Alistair. But he's going to be talking about actually visualizing the why, so the strategy and roadmaps in context. So we kind of talked a little bit about kind of why the change. So Craig is going to be discussing that. You can go out on our meetup page and RSVP for that one. Should be interesting. I also did a little YouTube interview with Craig some while ago. Interesting character, and I'll post that back out there as well. So, but Beth, I don't know how much time you have. I know you said you had a family thing, but
yeah, we're doing we're trying to plan a virtual picnic for this Bello Sguardo picnic. It's our heritage picnic for my husband's family's hometown in Italy, and they're trying to figure out how to do it virtually. So I somehow got volunteered to help with that, but I can hang out for a few more minutes. I'm happy to do that. I think the guys can get started without me if there's any other questions. And please reach out. As you can't tell, I'm very passionate and very open book. And it's, I just think everyone deserves a good shot at having a workplace where people feel good about being there and sharing their time and talent with. And that if we can do that, we have a greater chance of having people have less stress from their work that follows them home into their real lives. So that's the core of why I do this, is because I just think if we can do good in our workplaces, it's going to do good for our communities and our lives. And I want to be a part of that. So, if you ever want to talk about it, you know who to call. And Bruce, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And we'll get to teach another class together, our agility and HR certification class. It's a lot of fun, and we get really deep into all this. So maybe we should spin up something.
Yeah. And that's always interesting too, because, Greg and I were talking in one of our breakouts. I mean, the silver lining behind all this is, being in some of these workshops with people from Sweden, from Brazil. So even learning about HR in different cultures, different regions, different countries is always very interesting. Yeah. And if